Thank you firstly to all the organisers and the sponsors of the con for accepting my talk submission. I'm David, otherwise known as DJ or Moss, and today I'm going to be talking to you about building a security team and then using that team to build an army. Firstly, let's just get this out of the way. It's not a technical talk, so hopefully you'll still have a nice easy ride through this presentation. What I'll be telling you about, there's hints and tips throughout the talk, but there's no silver bullet, so you will really depends on the environment that you'll find yourself in, who your current team members are, what your trust levels are, if there are any within your team, and so your mileage might actually vary. So firstly, the obligatory, why should you listen to me? My current role is a principal security consultant, but I've had a variety of other roles throughout my career. So I was a quality assurance tester for a while, then went into application support, systems admin, business analyst, DBA, bit of development, solution architect, security engineer, and now I'm here. So I've basically done a lot of things where you've had to keep systems running because that's the only thing that works and we don't want to update it or fix it. I've also designed some solutions from the ground up, and because of that, I've been in the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff when things went wrong. I have a range of leadership skills that I've built up over a period of time. And so the easiest way to summarize that is I've seen some pain, I've prolonged pain, I've created pain, felt pain, managed pain, and now I'm more interested in treating the root cause. So I'm here to try and help people think about how they can actually embed security into organizations by building a really strong team. So I was going to put in an agenda slide, but pretty much as my title talk says, there's two parts to it. The first part is building a team. The second half is building an army. So without further ado, the first thing that you really need to think about is why. Now, what I mean by that is basically, why does your team actually exist? And for different organizations, the security team might actually have a slightly different focus. So you need to understand what your long-term vision is. What's the CISO's vision? What's your strategy, if you have one? You need to, once you understand that, you can kind of define your purpose. And from that, you can actually figure out how you accomplish your why. After that, then you can actually figure out what's the basic tasks or services that you actually do day to day and what your team will offer. But it comes back always down to that why. You really need to be able to succinctly explain that to people so that you can actually get them onto your side as part of the team. So whenever you engage with people around the organization, you have to reiterate that why. The why is more compelling than the what. So to give you an example, imagine I was working for Apple. If they started with their marketing campaigns and said, what we do is we make great computers, everyone would be like, yeah, whatever. If they started with their how and said, well, they're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly, it's kind of getting there, but not quite there. But if you look at all their marketing campaigns, usually it's, we support the crazy ones. We believe that they can change the world. We challenge the status quo, and we think differently. So that as a why is much more compelling than we make great computers. So in the security realm, a similar vein is kind of like, well, we as our why, we believe we can embed security into an organization's culture, as an example. The way we do this is, well, we make security everyone's responsibility, not just the security teams. And we allow people to make risk-informed decisions. What we do, well, we help it advise and guide and provide recommendations to build secure systems to reduce the likelihood of a security incident happening. So me personally, I'm a bit of a visual learner and I like good analogies as my team will grow. So hopefully a lot of you will like music, and so I've thought of how can I relate this back to something that everyone would understand. So imagine our why is we want to be a legendary rock star, as Dave Grohl is over there. So that could be our why, and so there's a link to music throughout this presentation as best as I could do it. So the next thing to bear in mind is that we're actually playing an infinite game. So whether you're on the blue team or the red team or some shade of purple, like attackers and defenders are in an unknowingly game of cat and mouse. Like, as soon as we build up our defenses, another, insert phrase here, happens. So whether it's another 0-day gets dropped, a vendor hard codes another credential, a third party that has our data gets breached, or another risk gets accepted and added to the risk register. These are common things that are kind of always, coming up to us as we're actually doing our day-to-day work. But we have to educate people that it's not a once and done. You're never going to be 100% secure. In the case of a finite game, the rules are fixed, the players are known, and the end state is you either win or you lose. We don't want to lose because it usually means we'll be out of business. So the idea is to try and make sure that people understand it's an infinite game. You're never going to be finished. You can never be 100% secure. You just have to, as some of the previous previous speakers have talked about, you have to put as many of those different layers in between to actually make sure that you can continue to play the game, forever as such. So, haven't got a reference to music here, but imagine you've got a repeat symbol is the best way I can explain it. The next thing that you actually probably need to do is actually get to know yourself. So if you're there to actually build a team, you might be the leader of that team, or you might be someone who has to help drive change throughout the organization. So you need to really know who you are as a person and what your values are. So you really need to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and you may need to put yourself in uncomfortable situations to learn what you can excel at and what things that should be left to someone else, like giving a talk at a conference. You need to sometimes also, by doing that, you'll learn to know what you can do and what you're good at, and what things really should be left to other people so you can give them ownership of those projects and let them drive it. So, but throughout this, as part of this, you will need to be able to communicate that why. So you need to be able to understand how to communicate and also how to anchor people around the organization to what that why is, because you're likely to be a driving force of change throughout the organization. So you have to be able to give that description of that why with enough conviction to be able to center people around that vision. After you know yourself, you can now start to actually think about your team. So hopefully you're starting with a team and not having to rebuild something from scratch. But at that point, even if you are, you really need to get to know individuals. So, they're the most valuable thing in the organization. And when I say get to know them, I don't mean intimately. I just mean you need to know what makes them tick. So ask them genuine questions about how their weekends went and wait and listen to the answers. Don't just immediately go, oh yeah, fine. Hey, what about this project? Like, you need to actually understand who these individuals are and what they do on their weekends. As part of that, you need to understand what their strengths are and where they might need some improvements in some cases, and what they want to do with their career. So what direction they want to kind of go into, what do they want to do for fun, how they handle pressure, because we usually receive quite a bit of it in the security team, and how they like to be managed. Jeremy talked about trust previously in the talk just before. That is really, really key to working in security and definitely building a good team. So just like you would do with a stage dive, if any of you have ever done it in a rock constant, you need to gauge the opinions and the feelings of the crowd. You need to understand and build that trust before you can actually continue to do things like, that might be slightly more risky. So as a leader, you need to actually show vulnerability. Now, that doesn't mean you end up going to cry at meetings. It means you actually show people what's going on in your life, as well as asking for help when you're not sure about things, or admitting when you get things wrong. Like, you literally have to show that you're human. And by doing that, other people will actually start to kind of reciprocate those kind of feelings. So most people will say, don't mix personal and professional life. I would err on the side of, actually, if you do that, you really build that really good trust amongst your team, because you start to, people understand and start to understand what makes you tick. So by going first as a leader and showing that you're vulnerable and that you make mistakes, your team members are more likely to tell you if they've actually done something wrong or something else has happened that you need to be made aware of. People also need to be freely able to ask questions and give opinions, as well as raise risks and issues without any fear of consequences. So Sarah talked about in the aviation safety talk about having a reporting culture, and that definitely starts with your team. You want the team to be able to come to you and be like, hey, I've stuffed up, and in most cases, when you're not dealing with life or death, it doesn't really matter. Like, we can deal with it and move on. But the first step is getting people to actually come and report to you about that. But trust isn't built overnight. It really takes a while to build up. So you have to start as soon as possible and actually show that vulnerability when you're doing bits and pieces with your team. So hopefully at this point, your team might start to grow, or you need to start recruiting people. And the biggest advice I would say is you have biases. So don't recruit people exactly like you. You need a team that looks at different things from different perspectives. So if you think about a normal band, you don't have 4 lead singers or 4 drummers or 4 keyboard players or 4 guitarists. There's a little mixture there. You'll have a mixture of different people who each has their own unique abilities and interests, so that you can find out more about those things rather than just everyone who looks like yourself. The more diversity you do have in a team, the better it is, because you'll look at those problems from different angles. It also means that if you're looking to hire for a particular role, unless it is a technical role, don't immediately exclude people with a business bent to their personality or to their career. They often actually understand or have an appreciation for what stakeholders want and what they need, or from a business perspective. So actually getting that into the team can actually be quite beneficial for yourself. So once you have your team there, you need to start actually making them slightly more T-shaped. So if you don't know what T-shaped is, I pity the fool. So, sorry, had to do it. So those of you who know Mr. T, there's this concept in security about making you a T-shape. What that basically means is you go ideally broad before you go deep. So being broad means having lots of skills or having experience across lots of different types of either industries or different types of topics within the security domains, rather than specializing in one particular area. By doing that, you actually have the ability to drop people into different scenarios, and they can actually still swim without going, I only know my little thing here, I can't go to anything else, or I can't advise or consult on other things. By making them that wider, they actually have much more skills and can relate problems from those different perspectives. So it's really, really good for people who are very experienced or knowledgeable, because they actually usually like to kind of give that knowledge. And so sometimes you might want to buddy up someone who has less experience with someone who is quite broad, for them to gain that other additional experience. The best example I can kind of give is, well, you might be able to play like a guitar or a stringed instrument, so branching out to other stringed instruments may not be as difficult as soon as you know one. So broadening that ability should help for yourself and for your team members. So as a leader, you actually have to start, or if you're starting from scratch, there's not likely to be any kind of roadmap or strategy or vision in place. And so, like I mentioned before, you have to be able to articulate that why. So you're going to be leading from the front. You're probably going to have to drag this business from legacy ways of doing things and get them to see things from a different perspective. So, in one sense, to be able to do that, you have to be able to have the conviction to explain to people what that why is and get them to understand so that they start to follow you. Hopefully with your team, they understand that as well. So it's not just you, it's you and your team just dragging the business to get them to think about different ways. But at that point, you've hopefully gained enough momentum where you don't need to be at the front championing the change. You can now take a supporting role and let individuals within your team actually drive those activities and those projects as such. So it doesn't just rest on yourself. Your other team members are now taking that on board and doing it on your behalf. So the easiest example I can kind of relate back to music is a conductor. So you might let your lead violinist or celloist take the solo for a particular point in time in music, but you're still there providing that support and guidance to make sure everything else is happening as you expect to get the team to deliver on projects and solutions. So this comes back down to the second half of the presentation, which is to do with now you've built a really, really good team. That's all well and good, but in most cases, a security team is usually a really, really, really small percentage of an organization. So in most cases, the stats are like 1 to 5%. So if you think about if you have 20 people in your team and your organization is, let's say, 2,000, that's like 1%. So even if you have a smaller team of, let's say, still 20 people in your security team, but 500 people in your organization, that's still only like 4%. That's not a lot to actually understand or know what everyone else is doing throughout the organization. So you need to be able to now leverage your team that you've built and hopefully got going and really, really well, use them to turn them into producing an army. So get them to kind of get other people within the organization to come along this journey and support what we're doing. So just to clarify, when I'm talking about an army, I'm not talking about a civilian hacking back or anything like that, or filling your innermost desire to be like an authoritarian regimental platoon commander, nothing like that. The first step for this is basically actually getting management to provide real support. So hopefully if you've already started and created a team, you would have already had some funding, some support, and some agreement to kind of go, yes, you can go hire a bunch of people to build a team, but it doesn't stop there. Like having money and budget is great, but you also have to have other executives to espouse the same why throughout the rest of the organization. They are key to actually changing the business's culture. So although your team may have gained that momentum, it's management reinforcing that why that actually will help you to get to the next stage. So where you might have had a department of no, harking back to kind of Creature's talk about governance and culture change, it's now management that really, really has to help support the security team be able to make those changes. You know, where the business might say we take customer security seriously, this is where it's actually, it comes back down to the culture and making sure everyone is aware that it's people's responsibility, not just the security teams. At this point, you now need to do exactly what you've more or less done with your team, but now repeating it to a much larger audience. So you have to reiterate and explain the why of why you're doing this. You have to reiterate and explain that it's an infinite game that we're playing. Going back to Laura's talk, you have to go chat to people around the organization and explain and tell them why they need to care about security. You need to make sure that you understand what other teams want, and so what is actually driving them to meet their particular goals so that you can support them effectively. As well as building trust over time with the organization by helping them meet their goals, they will likely reciprocate the favor. You'll notice that once you've started gaining this momentum with your team, other people around the organization, other squads will actually start to take notice. So because your team members are kind of driving this change and actually being an evangelist for the team's why, that enthusiasm will start to resonate with people, and other people will be like, I want to join that team. Like, that sounds fun. Like, you guys are delivering stuff. We just sit in change board meetings, but we don't ever get anything delivered. Can we come and join? So, people naturally want to be on the winning team. So for those, who accomplish things, people will try and maybe copy what you've kind of done. So mimicry is like the sincerest form of flattery, but hopefully, other teams will actually start to try and actually help support you and help support your own goals as well. Or they could go the opposite and try and block you, because you're always going to have some resistance to change. You just got to take that with a grain of salt, and the best way to deal with that is usually getting those other teams and other people on board by getting them involved in some of the planning of some of the changes that you're going to implement. At this point, everyone is aware that trying to find security people is like unicorns, and so, finding good people is hard. You can start obviously with education and starting with people really, really young and potentially grabbing them from graduate programs and things like that. But another easy way that I've found that kind of works is you actually get people who have really good skills but are in different areas and cross-train them or bring them from other areas. Because usually they've actually seen a lot of the pain or felt the pain or created that pain. And so they actually already know this stuff subconsciously, but you want to bring them across into your team to help. So a lot of those people that you might be able to discover have really direct transferable skills. And so using them to either come into maybe a kind of security champions program, so they're invited into the tent, so they get a little perspective of other things behind the scenes. It really helps to build those closer ties with other people around the business and the organization. As part of the rest of the organization, you'll get to this point where you have to start with something. So start really small. So back to, I think, Kento, on Kento's talk, if you're trying to do anything with the business, start with something very, very specific or very small. So whether it's like, I want to have one threat model done as part of this particular squad before you do anything kind of going forward, or to Laura's talk again, let's do an hour of security work through your sprint. That's something that you can kind of potentially, do and actually implement, but it really depends on, you have to gauge the waters. So if you look at your environment and, there's decades of underinvestment, you're still running like random, OS versions or browsers on servers for some reason, those topics as such like give you a hint of what you can actually potentially try and what you can get done or not. At this point, again, with those basics, management is also still key. They have to provide that support. So if you're making simple changes, management have to support that process to be able to actually get that change actually delivered if they want to end up having security as part of their culture. At this point, hopefully you've actually made some changes. And so as part of the organization, you want to celebrate those little things. So even if it's someone around the organization saying, hey, I think I've spotted something that looks a bit funky, like somehow reward them. So at some organizations, we've done silly things like actually get chocolate marshmallow fish, and send that to people if they've found a phishing email. Or if it's something else, trying to find some way to reward them, even if it's taking people out for coffees. You might be spending a lot, but it's actually really, really worthwhile. If someone calls out an issue or a risk, rather than kind of walking past it as such and be like, hey, I really think this is a problem, try and make sure that's, again, escalated through to management so they are aware of it and can actually do something about it. But again, you have to reward those people to make sure that they know that that is something that you want to continue, because it helps build that trust and that culture long term. So lastly, just to kind of summarize some of the key points as such here is, so if you were building a team, the main things from my perspective is making sure that you start with that why. You have to be able to convince people and communicate that effectively, as well as the fact that this is not a once and done thing. Once you deploy your EDR solution, you're not going to be 100% secure. You need that Swiss cheese approach, so you need to kind of continue. Don't recruit people just like you. Make sure when you do get people on board that they are from different backgrounds and perspectives and have different skill sets, and make sure that they are more T-shaped. As well as from an army point of view, once you have a good team running, make sure that management are still providing really good support, which comes back to your communication and that why back to management so that they understand. If you have that engaged team, it's infectious. You'll start to find people start to reach out to you to actually ask for help or to tell you the different things, as well as making sure you look for the next generation and start with the basics. So with that, quick thanks to Thomas, Karen, Nubs, Hoofy, and Shell for help with the talk, and to all of you for staying for my talk. Thank you.
Busted.